The domestic violence shelter is actually in Cheney, but it's out of the way. And if you don't know where it is, it's harder to find. We want to keep it that way because the women who are in there, are running from something. And one of the things we want to do eventually is get a home for men.
Ed Ashley leads a support group for men in Spokane. The program is called Men of Compassion, and interestingly, it's run by an organization called the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network. I first asked Ed this question. When the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network started in 2008, I'm guessing there wasn't at the time a program available to help male survivors of domestic violence. So how did that ultimately come about?
That came about actually 3 years ago. There were several of us involved. Like I'm on the board of directors for the Women's Healing Empowerment Network, and we have a domestic violence shelter for women, but it's not the typical domestic violence shelter. In this case, we're teaching women how to no longer to stay out of those kind of relationships, identify the perpetrator, identify this type of man. But in the process, there's a few of us who were like, we need something like this for men. And it came up, one of the couples, one of the women who actually was in the program was bringing the material back to her husband, and he's studying it with her. And as a couple, their relationship completely changed because not only is she healing from the violence she suffered growing up, she was massively sexually abused as a child, and her husband was also sexually abused massively. And they found each other and got married, and it was really rocky. But she went to the program. The program, in helping her, she took it to her husband, and he started healing from what she was teaching him. And May was like, "We need a program." So I was kind of volunteered for the job. It wasn't my idea. I'm like a reluctant leader in it.
Men of Compassion gives the impression that this is men who will be offering compassion, when in reality it sounds to me like it's men who are receiving compassion.
The meeting we had last night, I wish I could get into it with you, but we have to keep anonymity and things like that. But what we went through last night exemplifies the name, because as this one brother was processing, all the other men were pouring compassion into that brother so he could process more, and it opened him up to things he didn't see before. And we all benefited from that, because when that happens for one, we know, well, when it's my turn, I'm going to get that too. Every meeting, God has somebody who needs to get some things out. And everybody doesn't show up at every meeting, but the ones who show up are the ones who are supposed to be there, because it's always perfect. There was one meeting where Colin and I didn't say a word. And there's two people. This one was going through so, and this one was giving him his experience from what, and we're just sitting there amazed at what's happening, and it's God at work. This is true intimacy when we reveal who we really are. It's not, how are you doing? Oh, fine. And whenever somebody says that to me, it's like, oh yeah, frustrated, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. You're fine. Yes, I got it. And they'll look at you, and then they have to say, well, okay. And we try to get them to the point where, because if we're not opening up and revealing who we are, we're wasting our time.
I'm aware that some of the curriculums that are about domestic violence, they contain some gender bias, where they're written in a way that frames domestic violence as a situation where only men mistreat women, and the main driver is the sense of patriarchy and entitlement that men have to be able to mistreat women, because that's how our culture raises them. That's kind of one school of thought, and some domestic violence related curriculums teach from that kind of ideology. So I thought it was interesting to hear that the curriculum that the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network uses for their domestic violence, I think, courses with female DV victims is the same curriculum that you all use in the Men of Compassion course. If that's right, then I'm guessing that means that particular curriculum is not ideologically driven by this idea of patriarchy, and that domestic violence is merely a matter of men mistreating women.
A lot of what's written, she's had to go in and retype it, because it was originally directed at the women dealing with men. And so she's had to retype it for us.
Who is
Um,
she?
well, Mabel Dunbar, she's the one that runs the Women's Healing Empowerment Network. And
Got
I'm
it.
running the Men of Compassion, which falls underneath that. And the Men of Compassion is strictly for the guys. So the women are not allowed in. We don't, the guys who are Zooming in, they got to make sure that the doors are closed, their kids and their wives or whoever else is not in the room with them, because we need to have anonymity for guys, because we're going to divulge things about ourselves that we may never have divulged before. A lot of guys are saying things they've never said in public before, and they want to feel safe that this is a safe space for that. It's going to stay here. But yeah, the curriculum is, she basically took the women's curriculum and has reshifted it for the men. It still needs some more work because there's still some places where it says she, this, he, but we just move along with it.
One of the things that some people don't understand about domestic violence is that in some portion of relationships in which there is abuse, there is violence that is bidirectional, where both partners use violence because they haven't learned more healthy ways of conducting themselves. Is that kind of relationship dynamic something that you've been exposed to through your work with men?
Most interesting thing is, a narcissist is a narcissist is a narcissist, whether it's a male or a female. Female narcissists generally are better at hiding their narcissism because they can get really cute. Okay, they're really cute, and narcissists are good at looking good to the outer world, whereas inside the home we see the devil, and it's not hidden. The devil is right there, but everybody, oh, she's such a wonderful lady. How could you say that about? What is wrong with you? She's the perfect wife. You don't live in my house. I had a friend, Larry, who, when he got out of prison, he used to do a circle of abuse classes, and in his experience, there's a circle of abuse, and I'm seeing it more and more. A woman she can push the buttons. She knows the buttons to push to get him off balance. She knows what she's doing, and it is abuse, even though you can't see it. You can't see what she's ripping his psyche apart. And when he finally can't take it anymore, he either leaves or he puts his hands on her. Those are the only two options. He can't stay there and allow that to keep happening, because she's decimated his internal psyche completely. She's ripped him to shreds, mentally, psychologically, emotionally. If he's a macho man, he'll physically rip her apart. If he's a caring man, he'll walk out the door. But that's your typical relationship where she's not putting her hands on. Then you have women like my second wife who would throw things. She never hit me with anything, but she could throw things around the house and get mad and upset. And those are the women who are more than likely to put their hands on their man.
Sometimes people use the term gender violence or gender-based violence as an interchangeable term for domestic violence, or it might be an umbrella term for domestic violence, sexual assault, and sex trafficking. Have you heard this term gender violence or gender-based violence?
No.
Okay, I didn't see it on the website of the Women's Healing and Empowerment Network in Spokane. So that gave me the impression that that's not a concept that the organization that you're with tries to use. I think it comes from an ideological perspective where it's focusing on patriarchal oppression theory, which says that anytime there's sexual assault or domestic violence or sex trafficking, it's essentially an element of men mistreating women. And so you can use the term gender-based violence interchangeably with domestic violence. I think that's very inappropriate. And I especially think in public policy, we should not be doing that, because it really does erase the existence of male victims and female perpetrators. But unfortunately, it's common. So one of the pieces I published that I'm most proud of on my website is a detailed explanation and argument for why we should not be using the term gender-based violence interchangeably with domestic violence.
And I have to agree 100% as far as that is not a term we should use at all, because Just as many women are abusing men as men abusing women. The difference is we as men don't like to admit that, so it's not reported. We don't like to admit that my little wife has been beating the snot out of me and I have too much respect to return it, so I left. We don't, there's too much, loss of face for a lot of us. But when we talk about my babysitter raped me as a kid and she was a female. Okay. So this is a female who had me had sex with her. Now I didn't know it was rape because sex is pleasurable. She had me, I was 6, she's 13. Okay. My second wife, and I didn't know I was raped. I was telling a friend of mine, as my wife and I was having an argument, and I'm not one of those who we have an argument and make up and do the sex thing. It's like, I'm mad, I got to get over it. I've got to get by it. And she pushed me on the back. I said, no, I don't want to have sex. I'm laying there like this. She yanks my pants off and goes to town. And I'm just laying there like this. And I didn't know it was rape because we don't think of when a man says no, it's still rape. We don't think that, but she raped me. Okay.
We just assume that men wouldn't say no.
Right.
Like it's a shameful thing if a man ever would turn down sex.
Right. Right. So to say no is still no. And we need to tell our boys that when you say no, it's still no. And it's not shameful, although the way things are, if we go to the police, they're going to be like, yeah, right. I mean, that's where we are because of things like the proposal of things like what you just said, a gender-based. Well, how did you put that?
They either call it gender-based violence or just shortened to gender violence.
Violence is violence. Looking at the guys that I have in my group, the guys that are willing to come to the group are guys who are being, abused by their counterparts.
You're talking about the Men of Compassion group?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. That's interesting to hear. I do happen to know that there have been lots of studies that have produced wide varieties of results, but there are many, many studies that have found approximately equal rates of perpetration of relationship abuse, including violence. And of course, there are higher rate when you talk about domestic violence homicide, that is certainly imbalanced where more men are killing women. I think it's at least 2/3 of the domestic violence homicides, if not more, are men killing women. But among the whole umbrella of domestic violence, a very small percentage of all domestic violence results in homicide. But all of domestic violence is bad and really hurts people and makes people afraid on a day-to-day basis, and anxious, like I experienced in my relationship. I knew that it was possible that anything could set my ex-wife off, where there are knives in the house. There are ways she could certainly kill me. And if I've seen that she's capable of totally losing her cool and throwing her fists at my face, or while she's driving a car, she's punching me, then it's not a stretch at all to think that tomorrow it could result in my death.
Right. Right.
Do people need to be Christian to participate in the Men of Compassion?
No.
Do they need to be in Spokane?
Right now, that's all we have. We're hoping that we can grow this.
Are you aware of any other groups like your Men of Compassion group around Washington State?
I don't really know of anybody who does what we do, like how we do it. There might be some other things, but I'm not aware.
It's so interesting that it's part of an organization that is called Women's Healing Empowerment Network, and that was founded to help women in the problem of domestic violence. That's pretty unusual. I think it's pretty extraordinary because, at least historically, there has been this development of this ideology around the issue of domestic violence, which would make, I think, most domestic violence advocacy organizations or service providers, they have some bias, they have some prejudice, and they wouldn't be real keen on offering a class where they're welcoming in men whose experiences kind of violate, the belief system or the ideology, which says domestic violence is just a matter of women mistreating men. So it's quite a testament to the fairness, maybe to the compassion of the organization that you're a part of, that they wanted something to help men too.
If the women are healing and the men are not, who are the women going to? when they get out of there. So we need the men to heal so they have somebody to go to. Otherwise, why are they going to heal and then get back in another sick situation? So we need an organization for the men to heal. And that's really the outworthy men of compassion. And Mabel made up the term men of compassion. When we first did Men of Compassion, Mabel actually did the group, and she was doing it so that me and Colin would learn how to do it. So she did that group and for a year, and then we took it over. So women who are compassionate could do it too, but I think it'd be easier for most men to open up to other men. It'd be harder to open up to a woman, even if she's competent. Some women could get away with it. Some women could gain the trust, but we do need more male counselors, not somebody who's just a book counselor and here's the theory, somebody who actually has dealt with his own demons. See, we grow up in a world where men are taught to be masculine, tough physically. You lift weights, you play football. We're taught that if you cry, you're a wimp, you're a coward, you're gay, you're not a real man. If you have feelings, so we're taught not to have feelings. And Men of Compassion, we're trying to teach the guys, you better get your feelings back if you want to survive this. I mean, God gave us feelings for a reason. When I went to treatment, when I was, on my addiction, the chemical stuff, I only had like a couple words for emotions: mad, angry, sad, happy, and that's it. Anything else, I had no idea. So if we don't have the verbiage for the emotions, how do we really articulate what's going on? We don't even know what's going on. So one of the things in Men of Compassion, we actually have a page with about 60 emotional words that we give the guys in our very first handout.